So this week I'm going to do a portrait painting, and the real subject of it is when a portrait isn't quite working and switching over to a new version. This applies to illustrations and composition in general. But you come up with an idea that seems like it could go for you, and then it falls apart in the course of things. So we'll jump right into it. So I decided to do a portrait of my friend Rhonda, who's a school teacher. She's an environmental advocate and activist. And I've known her in that space and in other kinds of political organizing and community work out here in the San Fernando Valley. And so I began with just a simple picture of her and decided that I would go for the picture, throw in a background that would give you a sense of sort of the world that she's a part of. We had gone to a climate march together in 2019, and that's what I used as the background in downtown LA. So you have the primary character of Rhonda there in the front, and then you have the context in which she lives, sort of the theme that I've set for her character. So as I was thinking through this, I was working a lot with shape to see how I could create a bridge between this character that really has a kind of wallpaper design behind her. So you can see at this point, as I finished my pencil drawing, I'm going in with digital inking to separate out shapes and to create that theme that I'm able to extend into the background. Sharp lines versus soft lines, curves versus angles, and identifying, the major sort of symbols of her character: her hat, her glasses, the globe that she's holding, her satchel. And then I'm figuring out how the background is going to reflect that, how it's going to support it through shape. So you can see that it's really that sort of curved line versus jagged line. You have these big zigzags and you have these big curves, or rather continuous curves of the individuals that make up the crowd. So seeing if I could use that in order to create a bridge. At this point in the drawing, I was already having the feeling that this was a bit boring. Compositionally, the concept was kind of flat. I'm just sort of taking a photograph, adapting it into a style, and then throwing wallpaper behind her. And so I was trying to make that work, because that can work, of course. And these are some of the methods that I use to attempt it. So I'm creating a foreground area for the characters that make up the background. Of course, they're far below her, so it really does read like a video playing behind her, or again, wallpaper. And as I'm going into color, I'm thinking of things very simply. How can I drop colors into Rhonda's character and into the background in order to create unity between the two areas? You can see very quickly throwing in those yellows and blues, generally identifying time of day. Her sun hat indicates that she's out in the sun, with, of course, the sun being the source of all warming, whether solar energy or global warming. And so having that as sort of an ever-present force that is sort of identifying and highlighting all the characters. Of course, it would with whatever the subject is. But as you can see, I cut out that little slice of light to indicate her hand holding the globe, thinking that might add some interest. And also create a sort of compositional triangle that is reflected in the flags that you see moving into the background, and also the big slices of crowd moving into the background. So beyond that, I am, working out some rendering in the face, seeing how far I can take that, because I wasn't really satisfied with flat coloring, or, just flat coloring and a little bit of texture. I thought, okay, this is not quite going for me. Let me try rendering. Let me try bringing it up to a higher degree of likeness. Let's make it look more like skin, and let's play with, more realistic local texture for the different parts of the subject matter in this picture. But I am working with big stylistic contrast. You have the figure of Rhonda versus these little sort of caricatural protesters and marchers down there. One person has a No Planet B sign. You have people with their green flags, the Earth Day type flags, that act as a nice mirror and repetition for the globe that she's holding. So at this point, seeing if I can unify that major stylistic difference through atmosphere, but realizing that it's not quite working for me. It's getting complete as a design, but the concept doesn't work. So that's where I dropped it. And then I moved on, having realized something that I think would make it more interesting. So I decided to really lean into the theme of her being a teacher as well as an activist. You know, there are a lot of portraits that, whether they're photographic portraits in major magazines or, you know, on news sites that, you know, represent these sort of activist warriors. I wasn't so interested in that kind of representation. I really wanted to highlight the sort of neighborliness and teacherliness, I suppose, of Rhonda. And so I thought, let's put it in that context. So you have these 4 images in one. The top right and the bottom left are using that same primary image of Rhonda, sort of photographs placed within popsicle stick frames, like, you know, kids will craft in elementary school. And then on the top left and the bottom right, I have kids' drawings of Rhonda, you know, as she's, you know, on the top left, she's leading a group of kids. On the bottom right, she's being represented by kids as that kind of activist warrior in a certain sense, right? She's sort of the nature teacher. She's got a windmill behind her. There are birds, you know, mountains, flowers, trees, etc. And at this point, coloring out the face. I realized that I liked the tools that I was using, the gouache and oil brushes. So I started building up her character on the top right, sort of setting a standard for the detail that I wanted in the top right and bottom left windows, after I'd gotten, you know, all this pencil drawing done. So it took a little time, and that was, as with so many projects artistically, if something sort of fails or you abandon it, it's not really a failure ultimately. You're taking what you've learned from it and you're transporting it, sometimes directly to another piece, and that's definitely what I did here, where a lot of the approach was conserved and used in this case. So doing that on the top right and doing that on the bottom left, getting a similar sense of lighting. It's sort of warm and soft, and it's, again, sort of placed against those funny popsicle sticks as a framing element. So from there, cleaning things up, you know, the line work had all been done, or sort of the basic pencil drawing. Now I'm going in with fine lines, doing a basic color in, you know, creating that contrast, using sort of the warm wood of the popsicle sticks in order to highlight that effect. And also using these little windows as their own sort of local atmospheres. You can see how I dropped in a layer of red, pulled out highlights from there, and left it at that point. From there, I'm developing those kids' images, which is another place of taking what I learned in the last image and conserving it for the purposes of this one, where I wanted that hard stylistic difference. Rather than me doing, you know, caricature faces in the crowd in the background, actually making it a kid's drawing, you know, giving it a little more substance, giving it a storyline, right? You have a sense of these kids celebrating their teacher, which kids will do, you know, with their favorite teachers. I'm also able to use a variety of brush techniques. So again, sort of gouache and oil for the top right and bottom left, more of a crayon pastel coloring for the top left and bottom right, and adding some other interesting framing elements, at least interesting for myself. So you've got the pins on the top left and the bottom right. You've got that little piece of tape that's connecting the pictures of Rhonda, to give it a sense of awkwardness and of reality, right? So little popsicle stick frames that are maybe sort of swinging to the side or not completely stable on the wall, and putting in that tape in order to secure them. Throwing a flower in there too, as if though somebody thought, okay, let's keep the theme going and let's make this pretty, and place that underneath the tape as well. I thought that was sort of an interesting place to go. It also allowed me to create an unusual textural layer that I wasn't really able to get in that first piece, or would have, you know, if I just left these as frames on the wall. So it was nice to have a center point. So at this point, you know, I'm figuring out that unity between these two types of pictures, the more sort of realistic renderings of Rhonda, and then the sort of pastel and line drawings that the kids are doing of her. You know, figured out a wallpaper behind it all, did some overlay colors to sort of unify things in warms and cools, and you can see at this point really figuring out how warm I want it to be, you know, how cool I want it to be. So adding in some pinpricks of light in Rhonda's picture there, which I thought just helped to deepen that space, rather than it just being a photograph rendered. Actually, what is the light beyond what we're able to see with the straw hat, which is kind of taking up the entire background and top area space of her head. I'm also working on rendering up to likeness. So like with so many portraits, you can find interesting compositional things to do, but at the end, there's always some tightening to make it look as much like the person as you would like it to look. And so spent some time on that. And as I was lifting that up, I was also working on how far do I want these popsicle sticks to be textured. I didn't have a reference for those. I was just sort of playing at them as I was building up texture in my more photographic areas. And there you can see I did a unifying, we'll just say a wash layer, pumping up the warms, pumping up the cools, and that wrapped it. So to me, I thought this was a good example, at least in how I work, of taking one piece that wasn't really going anywhere, conserving some of what I've learned in a second piece, and finding that to be, in this case, a more successful portrait. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. If you'd like to see more videos, feel free to comment. I'm happy to respond to any questions or anything. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.